her. You better make sure you worship her, because if you take a chance and don't worship her, what's going to happen? Your crops won't grow, you starve to death. Your child, you miscarries, your animals don't give birth. A fertility goddess can really mess with you. So there's an immediacy. I would argue that probably when it comes to ancient religion, while fertility goddesses were not the supreme god in most ancient religions, they were probably the most worshipped on a day-to-day basis, just because you got to be right with her, otherwise she can zap you and do really bad stuff to your life. So fertility is a super big deal. Well, what's at the heart of fertility? Ancient people were not stupid. Sex is at the heart of fertility. So how do you worship the fertility goddess? You have sex. And this is why you have temple prostitution. Okay, so it's the sex act as an act of worship, not unusually at a temple, in honor of the fertility goddess. That's how you show honor to the fertility goddess. You're doing her thing. Right? You're honoring her by doing the thing that she has control over. So sacred prostitution is not, it can be a pretty slimy affair, I suppose, but sacred prostitution, it's very logical. It makes a lot of sense why you would want to have sacred prostitution around. Because you want to honor the fertility goddess, and you do not want to slight her, because the consequences could be brutal. So this is why, by the way, Asherah poles, which have intentional sexual imagery, Asherah poles are very common at these high places, and you have lots of references to sacred prostitution. So just bear that in mind, that these people aren't being crazy, and they're not being, sex addicts. They are being very serious about worshiping a very serious goddess who controls the secret of life. So bear that in mind, and you'll understand why the Hebrews keep falling into this, and why you have sacred prostitutes, and why that's an issue. Yeah?
Would it be possible that then your wife is pregnant with a child that's not there?
What's that?
Would it be possible that your wife gets pregnant with a child that's not the husband? And
that does happen, doesn't it?
And then prostitutes get pregnant with somebody else's child?
Well, okay, you're asking two different things. So generally speaking, it is men who engage in sacred prostitution. That is, the men use the prostitutes. And prostitutes can be male or female, because it's the sex act that is the thing. Although generally female is preferable, because there's the possibility that you could have a birth, right? So this was considered okay for men to do this. It was considered not okay for women to do this, because if a woman does that, of course, she can become pregnant, and men have these insecurities about knowing whether the child that their wife has is their own. Because remember, it's patriarchal lineage. The family line is passed down through the father. So of course they're very concerned about whose child their wife might be pregnant with. So for a woman, there is definitely a sexist thing going on here, right? That this is patriarchy. So men engage in utilize the sacred prostitutes. A married woman to do that would be considered, she's messing with the family, and that's not a good thing. And of course, you very often will get the prostitutes themselves getting pregnant, but we, of course, don't hear their stories. But undoubtedly that was happening a lot. Yeah? Yes. I think because the sex act is the thing. And to be fair, if you actually run a temple and you have temple prostitutes, you like to keep them active. And if your females are all getting pregnant, that makes them inactive for a period of time, and your temple doesn't run so well. So to have male prostitutes who are not going to get pregnant, you can still have the sex act and not have them getting pregnant. So I think there's a practical matter. You know, just to think like a business person who's in charge of the temple, right? The sex act is the thing you do to worship the goddess. I think. I mean, you know, they don't tell us much about these things, but we do read about it in other texts. The ancient Greeks did this, ancient Mesopotamians did this. It's a pretty common thing. So just so you know, that stuff's all over the place, and every once in a while you get a glimpse of it in the Bible. Of course, from a Hebrew point of view, this is adultery. Right? At least for somebody who's married. This is adultery, so it's not okay on those grounds, much less the worship of the fertility goddess and so on. We already talked about Rehoboam's failure of leadership, and we don't need to go back and look at that again. He is succeeded by his son, Abijah, who mainly the thing said about him, he was evil like his father. Okay, so he followed in the steps of Rehoboam. So not only was Rehoboam stupid, right, a bad leader, but he was also, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and his son followed in his father's footsteps. However, Asa comes along, and Asa removed idols. Asa removed prostitutes, but he did not remove high places. You'll see this quite a bit. So now you know what high places look like. So it'd be kind of hard to remove them, but it would be not that hard to remove a pole that's sitting on top of one, for example. Or one of those matzevot, right? That's not that hard to get rid of those, but to get rid of the high place itself would be a bigger undertaking. He did not do that. He engaged in war with Baasha of the north quite a bit. He made an alliance with Ben-Hadad of Syria, so for a period of time they're working together. And according to our evaluation based on Deuteronomistic standards, as you know, he did right in the eyes of the Lord. This is the first one. Everybody say, yay! Somebody did right. In what sense did he do right? Well, the main thing seems to be removing the idols and the prostitutes. That's how he did right. And by the way, these guys get credit for pretty small things, by and large. Jehoshaphat follows. You see his dates and his text. He made an alliance with Israel. So once in a while, off and on, you have the south, Judah, fighting Israel. At other times, you have them allying with one another. It so happens that Jehoshaphat allied with the north at the time when Ahab was king. But nevertheless, he did right in the eyes of the Lord, even though Ahab, remember, is doing lots of not right up in the north. He's succeeded by Jehoram. Jehoram, now what do you do when you make an alliance? Usually, what do you do? Marriage, right? There's a marriage goes on. So Jehoram marries the daughter of Ahab because they're in alliance. So now this is Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. She, of course, influences Jehoram, and he becomes evil like Ahab. Ahaziah follows him. Ahaziah only reigned 1 year, but he had plenty of time to do evil like Ahab. So now we got this thing going on in the family for a couple generations. Ahaziah is replaced by the one queen of Judah, Athaliah. She was the granddaughter of Omri, so she's from the same family as Ahab by birth. She was the mother of the former king, Ahaziah, and when she took over, she killed off the rest of her family to make sure nobody else would take power from her. And interestingly, we don't get a judgment formula for her. It doesn't say she did evil or it doesn't say she did good. Maybe this is because she's a woman. I don't know, but the tone is distinctly negative. She is succeeded by her grandson, Jehoash. And when I say succeeded, he staged a coup. Okay, he took over militarily and took control. You can see he lasted quite a long time, 34 years. He was attacked. Now remember earlier, the kings of Judah had made an alliance with the king of Syria. Now, the king of Syria, now Hazael, attacks them. And Jehoash paid tribute. That makes him subordinate. But nevertheless, he turned the tables. He did right in the eyes of the Lord, but he's still allowed there to remain high places. Nevertheless, he was assassinated by his own servants and replaced by his son, Amaziah. Amaziah also retained high places. He fought a war against the Edomites and defeated them. He fought a war against Israel in the north, King Joash, and lost. And he's the guy, if you remember when we looked at it from the other end, he became a POW of the king in the north. He was actually captured by Joash in the north. That is that moment in time when the kingdom could have been reunited under Joash of the north, but instead Joash wanted money, And so Amaziah paid him off using spoils from the temple. He took stuff out of the temple and gave it to Joash so that he could be freed. Somehow in the midst of all this, he did right in the eyes of the Lord. And then he was succeeded by Azariah. Azariah lasted a really long time. He did right in the eyes of the Lord, but high places return. Interestingly, he had leprosy for a long period of time, and because he had leprosy, we have the first clear indication of a co-regency. Remember I told you the co-regencies when father and son are overlap, there's an overlap in the ruling. A lot of times we're not exactly sure where they are. This one we're sure. Because he had leprosy most of the time, so he had to be segregated, and he couldn't really carry on many of his functions as king, so his son needed to do them in his stead. So that was Jotham, who, and so notice please, look at the dates. 783 to 732 is how long Azariah lasted, but look, Jotham started in 750. Right, so the last half of his reign was co-regency with his son. You see that overlap? So this is one where we have an obvious indication of something else that's going on in other places we're quite sure, but not exactly sure how much or when.
But he still lived 3 years longer than Jotham. Right?
He lived 3 years longer, yeah. I mean, he's pretty much not functioning as ruler very much after his son kind of came into the picture. Yeah. There were tensions between, Jotham had tensions between Pekah in the north and Syria. It was the time of the ministry of Micah. So remember, Micah and Isaiah are roughly contemporaries in this period. He did right, but there were still those high places. He is succeeded by Ahaz. So notice what I did here with reference to your dates here. So Azariah lasts until 732. Jotham reigns until 735, and then Ahaz seems to start in 735. So still, Granddad is still around, but he's not in very good shape. By the way, I should say leprosy, there's a debate among scholars. It appears that when we talk about leprosy, we are not talking about the disease that in modern world we call leprosy. That's Hansen's disease. And Hansen's disease, it's debated among scholars when Hansen's disease reached this part of the world. But it may not, in fact, most people think that there was no such thing as Hansen's disease in this part of the world at this time. But leprosy is just kind of a general term used in Hebrew for any kind of infectious skin disease. Okay, obviously whatever he had lasted a long time, was pretty bad, but it might be psoriasis or any number of other infectious skin diseases, impetigo or these sorts of things. Not the Hansen's disease that we call in the modern world leprosy, where your body parts fall off and you go numb and you can't feel any pain and that kind of stuff. Ahaz departed once again from his family. He now not only keeps high places, but sacrifices at them. Not only that, he passed his son through the fire, which seems to be a reference to human sacrifice. So he sacrificed his own son. Some of the gods around them, in particular Molech and Chemosh, the gods of the Moabites and the Edomites, they seem to practice human sacrifice on occasion. Most people did not practice human sacrifice in the ancient world. They did in Hawaii, but they didn't in the Middle East. But those gods, Chemosh and Molech, on occasion you see some evidence of human sacrifice, so they seem to be influencing the kings of Judah here. King Ahaz was attacked by Syria and by Israel in the north, and he found himself in such a bad situation that he made the grand stupid move. He asked Tiglath-Pileser III to come into the neighborhood to help him out. And that, of course, is the beginning of the end for the north. He paid tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III. Tiglath-Pileser did attack. And, of course, some of you have held the clinker around here. That's one of the results of that attack. Also, apparently Ahaz was sort of an Assyrian king wannabe. You know, the Assyrians are the superpower. Israel's sort of living in their shadow, or Judah is sort of living in their shadow. And so what does he do? He remodels the temple in Jerusalem following the style of temples that are in Assyria. Ahaz is succeeded by Hezekiah, and Hezekiah is one of the heroes of the text. Hezekiah did right in the eyes of the Lord. He not only got rid of the idolatry and the prostitution, but he tore down the high places. It was Hezekiah who was king of the south when the northern kingdom was ended, the Assyrian siege of Samaria that we talked about earlier. And because of this, Hezekiah was no dummy. Hezekiah realized, oh crap, if the Assyrians did that in the north, it's not like they're going to stop there, right? We're next. We need to be ready. And so what he did was a very hurried project to protect Jerusalem. The two big pieces of the project that he did, and these are made reference to in the Bible, he built a wall, a new big broad wall they call it, a really big thick wall around Jerusalem, and he built Hezekiah's tunnel to make sure that Jerusalem would have a plentiful water supply in time of siege. It's a good thing he did because he in fact was attacked by King Sennacherib of Assyria, and he was able to withstand the siege because he had made things ready. Also, if you remember the story, Isaiah prophesies that the Assyrian siege will be lifted, a plague breaks out among the Assyrians, and they go home. And so, God was in on lifting the siege too, but they were only able to withstand the siege because of the wall and the tunnel that Hezekiah built. King Sennacherib goes on, while he is unsuccessful in taking Jerusalem, he does besiege it for a while and cause them a lot of trouble. He does successfully lay siege to Lachish and actually takes over that city, probably in 701. And Hezekiah pays to King Sennacherib a huge tribute. 30 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Remember, a talent's about 100 pounds. So this is one heck of a lot of money that he paid to the Assyrian king to leave him alone for a while. Here's a fascinating discovery that has been made recently. Remember I told you about seals? So a seal is something you punch into clay or wax to demonstrate your authority. This seal says of Hezekiah. This does seem to be authentic. There's been debates about it, but it does seem to be authentic. If this is it, this is Hezekiah's seal. So this would be something that you would use for official recognition that Hezekiah has approved this. What? What's it? Yes, Paleo-Hebrew, yes.
What is that symbol on the side of me? I see that a lot in ancient things.
It's an ankh. The ankh is the Egyptian kind of a sign of life.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Egyptian, so yeah.
Yep. And this, and Egyptian art very much affected the Hebrews. And this is a bee. This, I've already shown you this. This is a picture of the Assyrian siege of Lachish. You can see that they built a siege ramp. They have a battering ram coming up and beating up the wall. You see fire arrows being shot, and the general work of doing a siege. This is remarkably accurate, as we will see, because we can see what they're talking about in the archaeology of Lachish. We'll come back to that. Here's the broad wall in Jerusalem. So when you go to Jerusalem, and you must go to Jerusalem, go to the old city and go over to the Jewish quarter, and as you walk along some of the corridors in the Jewish quarter, every once in a while you'll see a place where this wall is exposed. This wall is about 24 feet thick. Okay, really thick, about 7 meters thick. And you can see it's made of fairly small stones. It was kind of thrown together quickly. In fact, so quickly that in some places, the wall where it needed to go, it kind of ran into a house. So they just built the wall right through the house. So you can actually see the walls of the house in the middle of the wall as they built this thing around. But it worked. Then there's Hezekiah's tunnel itself. So remember when we talked about Warren's shaft? So you'd go down to this area inside the wall and you could lower a bucket down the shaft and get water that way. Well, that's cumbersome, it's difficult, etc., and it's not as safe. So what Hezekiah did, remarkable, this is just unbelievable. He decided, instead of making people do great gymnastics to get to the water, he decided to bring the water to the people. So this is like Megiddo, where you had a spring, this spring right here that you're seeing. This is the Gihon Spring. Still flows. This is modern day. And by the way, you can walk through this, and it's very cool. But bring a flashlight. I made the mistake of not bringing a flashlight once, and I had a candle, and it blew out pretty quickly. And then it's like really, really dark, and it's scary. But and the water fluctuates. It'll be a lot of times it'll be as high as your knees or so. But sometimes it'll get above your waist, and sometimes when it's high flow, it'll get like here. And you're walking through this water in the dark, you know, and the tunnel's right here, and your head's here, and there's water up here, and you think, I'm going to drown, I'm going to die. But so far, only a few people have.
Is it cold?
So,
Really?
it's kind of cold. I mean, well, it's not, no, it's probably like the ocean here. It's not too, or maybe like fresh water here. You know, it's not, I mean, you shiver a bit, but not bad. And I'm a wimp. I'm a wimp when it comes to cold water, and I was okay. So, you'll be okay, I promise. Okay, so this is Hezekiah's tunnel. What he did was he had his engineers dig this tunnel, and they dug from both ends, and they did it in a hurry because they're trying to make sure their water supply is secure because they know the Assyrians are probably going to come to town with broomsticks. And this is what they dug. So at the top is the spring. At the bottom is a pool inside the wall. And this thing is about, in some cases, like 100 feet underground. They dug from both ends and they didn't go straight. And somehow they met in the middle. It's just, and you can see what happened when they met in the middle. They got very excited. And they started hacking all over the place. I can hear you. I know you're there. And you can see that actually when you're in the middle of the tunnel. You can see all these wild pick marks on the walls as the guys are saying, well, you know, this job's almost done. And then the poor guys who are on this side, because you know these guys could dig the floor just at the level where the water barely moved, right? So they didn't have to dig down because they knew what the level of the water was. These guys did not. So these poor guys dig along, and in some cases they dug the floor kind of too high. So then when the water started flowing, they had to go back and dig the floor down low enough to make the water flow. So all of a sudden the roof gets really high in those areas, and you can see where they made those kind of mistakes. But still, for goodness sake, this is 1/3 of a mile long. It's amazing. This is what it looks like on the inside. This at the place where they joined together, where they went kind of crazy. You can see the kind of wild pick marks. It's hard to take pictures in there, as you might imagine. Okay, so that's Hezekiah's tunnel. Now, if any of you, yes?
Do you have a theory of what technology, or I mean, how did they figure it out, how to get together? Because I was over there too in the tunnel. Nobody really had an answer. I'm just curious if you had a theory on that.
There's only one theory I've heard that makes any sense to me, and it's not very good. The one theory is that they followed natural fissures in the rock. But what makes you think that they would necessarily come together? You know, I mean, that's a wild, you know, if you're at the other end, the bottom end, and going up, and we'll just follow this fissure and see where it goes. It still seems kind of crazy to me, but I can't think of any other thing, because you can use surveying to do, you could put up flags at both ends and have sight windows along the way if you're going straight. But you can't do that if you're going crooked.
Somebody thought maybe they were tapping too on the rock, but I'm like,
well, yeah, they
hear tapping the whole way down through. So yeah.
You can tap when you get close, but that's only when you get close. Yeah, I mean, those swings are kind of grand. Okay, you know what? Let's take a break now. We'll take our break now. We'll finish this up after the break. Is that all right?
15 minutes, and we will be back in seats in 20 till.
Destructive yet grand, spiteful and gentle. Is it all just as you wanted, God? Or is it just random events and we are individually
Okay, if we can all come back inside, please. Thank you. Just a note, quick announcement. Next week, we're going to be having speaker John Randerson. He's going to be going over the prophets, and he'll be teaching Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday we'll be having a class outing, and I'll give you more details about that later. Thank you. Mr. Mark Smith.
All right, I'm on. So when John Randerson comes to class, you have to use the word flogging. Use the word flogging a lot. Threaten to flog him. If you say that again, I will flog you. Things like that, okay? Just practice using the word flog.
Broomstick.
I'll flog you with a broomstick. Okay, yeah.
What was flogging? As your Roman history dictates, what exactly constituted a flogging?
Well, flogging is whipping somebody, but there's different kinds of whipping of people. In the Roman period, it was a rather nasty thing because they tended. I've actually done quite a bit of research on this, and there's not much good evidence, but there is a little bit of evidence that the whip, at least one kind of whip they used, either had like little lead sinkers like tied onto the leather thongs, so when you hit somebody it had the weight of those, plus it was abrasive, so it would kind of rip up the skin. And in fact, they would use this for a death penalty once in a while. They would actually flog somebody to death. But more often they would flog somebody in preparation for crucifixion or something like that. So there's another one there's one picture on an ancient piece of pottery that shows, instead of having leather thongs, it had a handle with little chains, and the chains had like little metal bells attached to them. So you can imagine what kind of damage that would do. So whatever it was not good. And we do have some cases where the Romans did actually flog people to death, and I guess that was pretty awful. So flogging is actually quite nasty. So don't do it to John, just talk about it, okay?
Why would it make sense to him, because he's talking about...
He likes that word. He's always talking about flogging. So he just, doesn't he? He loves the word flogging. So you can start flogging him with the word flogging. He will like that. Who told you to do this? You tell him me. You tell him I sent you. John's a good friend. Okay, so what is this? Siege of Lachish. Lachish is in the hill country just south of Jerusalem, and this is the Assyrian relief showing that account. Now, here is the excavation at Lachish. So remember I told you that sometimes on archaeological sites they'll put a real steep wall and they're buried in mud and that sort of thing to prevent somebody from bringing up a battering ram? That's what they did here. So this is what's called a glacis, that steep wall that they put up, and they would cover that with mud to make it hard to bring up a battering ram. When the Assyrians came to town, they had battering ram and they wanted to bring up their battering. Well, this was a problem for them, so what did they do? They built a siege ramp. So the Assyrians built this so they could get a gentler slope and better traction to be able to get their siege ramp, to get their battering ram up to the wall to be able to break down the wall. So when you put the Assyrian, so this is the actual Assyrian siege ramp that they excavated that was built over top of the original glacis that was part of the fortifications of the city. And when you put the Assyrian relief next to what they found, you can see, wow, that actually fits quite well, right? Here's the siege ramp. You can see the little bricks here. There's the siege ramp, and bring up the battering ram. That's that siege ramp right there. Okay, so it's actually these even though they look a little funny, these Assyrian carvings are actually quite accurate to what happened. Remember also the picture I showed you of the guys getting impaled? That was here.
Broomstick or spear?
It doesn't show on the thing, can't tell. Oh, what are these? Broomsticks. That's just the answer to everything. No, you got to change now. The answer is flogging. This is flogging. No, what is this?
Tri-pillars for the tripartite king.
Oh, that would be a good idea. No, it's only one line. If you had two lines, it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah. No, what are these? These are part of an excavation, yeah. These are matzevot. These are matzevot.
Wow, these bigger.
They're bigger. This is at Gezer. So they had matzevot at Gezer. You've already seen the Gezer gate. There's the Gezer gate. Okay, let's get out of here and go back. I just wanted you to see that, especially at Lachish. Oh, I have to tell you one other thing about Lachish. Lachish. I got to tell you one other thing. I have to put the picture back up. Uh-oh. I did the bad thing. Uh-oh. Okay. Here, we'll do that. All right, Lachish. So, up the hill from here, I don't have the picture, but I won't waste time going to hunt for it. So you go in a gate. There's this very small 6-chamber gate there at Lachish. And then all you really have at the site now is a big building made out of stone right in the middle of the tell. This was the fortified headquarters for the local governor of Judah. And at that place, right in front of it, when archaeologists excavated, they found a pit, and the pit was filled with Hebrew bones. Okay, the Hebrews had been just butchered at the siege of Lachish, and they were just thrown in a big pit. And then, on top of that, all those human bones, pig bones. So they knew that Hebrews didn't like pigs, so when they slaughtered them, they threw them in a pit, and they killed a bunch of pigs and threw it in on top of them just to insult them. Wow. You gotta love those Assyrians, don't you? They have a point to make.
They don't have to put the cherry on top.
Okay, let's see, where are we? Oh, back to David and Goliath, okay. We did all this. We did all this. Let's see, we just passed Hezekiah, didn't we? There we go. All right. Oh, we did this, we did this. We did that, and that, and that, and that. Hey, here we are. Okay. So, if any of you are a parent and you find your children to be frustrating on occasion, you can feel for Hezekiah, because Hezekiah was one of the high points, if you will, of 2 Kings, and his son is arguably the greatest disappointment, and that is Manasseh. And Manasseh ruled for a very long time. After his dad had torn down the high places, etc., he built them up. Manasseh. He also, even in the temple itself, set up an altar to Baal. He practiced human sacrifice, passing his son through the fire. He consulted mediums in violation of the law. He put up an Asherah pole in the temple. It was during this period of time that we have the ministry of Nahum. That's how you say his name, Nahum. Can you say Nahum? Nahum, not Nahum. 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 Because of Manasseh's behavior, God cursed him. God said, basically, I've had enough. Because of you, because of your behavior, I am that ultimately I am going to bring bad guys against you. This is one of the things that is particularly striking about this book. The people of the north, you could always say about the kingdom of the north, they're a breakaway kingdom. They broke away from Jerusalem. They broke away from the line of David. They had their separate temples. They abandoned the temple of God in Jerusalem. But in the south, you could always say, look, we have the line of David. We have the temple. We have Jerusalem. We're the faithful ones. We stuck with it. God would never allow Jerusalem to be taken. And he didn't, remember, when Sennacherib laid siege to Jerusalem. God would never allow his own temple to be destroyed. God would not let that happen. And in the text talking about Manasseh, God himself says, you want to try me on that? Because of you, I will abandon Jerusalem. That is simply shocking, and quite frankly, nobody took it seriously. We also, very interestingly, have in the book of 2 Chronicles, I'm sure you noticed, that after this curse, Manasseh said, oh crap. He took it seriously and he prayed a prayer of repentance. Did you notice that? That's one of the big differences in 2 Chronicles. He prayed a prayer of repentance. In the apocryphal books, we actually have a prayer attributed to Manasseh. We don't know if it has anything to do with historical Manasseh, but we actually have a prayer that gives some content to that, a prayer of repentance. So, he is in any case replaced by Ammon. Ammon followed in the way of his father and didn't last very long. He is succeeded by Josiah. And Josiah is really the hero, in many ways, of the book of 2 Kings. Josiah, remember after what Manasseh had did, Josiah repaired the temple, restored it, and in the process discovered the book of the law. Remember that the kings were always supposed to have a copy of the book of the law and be reading it. Nobody had. He found it, and what did he do? He started reading it. And when he started to read it, he was simply horrified. And he said, we haven't been doing this. Oh crap, we're in trouble. We need to fix stuff. And so he began to do a lot of reforms. And so, of course, he did all the normal stuff. Well, not the normal stuff, but the honored stuff in the book of 2 Kings, namely tearing down the high place, getting rid of the prostitutes, breaking down the Asher poles, etc. It's also during his reign that we had the ministry of Hula. Hula, isn't that a great name? Hula. One of the gates in the temple at the time of Jesus was called the Hula Gate. The Hula Gate. Hula was a female prophet. Very interesting. We have the ministry also of Zephaniah and the beginning of the ministry of Jeremiah. Of course, Josiah did right in the eyes of the Lord and really became the paradigm of what it means to be right. It was during his reign also that the Babylonian rebellion was successful, remember, and King Nabopolassar, the first king of the Babylonians, overthrew Nineveh and the Assyrians. So the Assyrian Empire is over now while Josiah is ruling. Because the Assyrian Empire is over, because the rebellion of the Babylonians was successful, Egypt decided to take advantage in the person of Pharaoh Necho. And Pharaoh Necho marched into Israel, because remember that Israel is kind of a crossroads between Assyria and Babylon and Egypt. So to get from one to the other, you kind of have to go through Israel. So Pharaoh Necho came marching up into Israel. At this point, King Josiah made a fateful and rather stupid decision. He decided to go take on Pharaoh Necho. So he went to Megiddo. You remember Megiddo? He went to Megiddo, and there he fought a battle against Pharaoh Necho, and not only lost, but got himself killed. So ends the great career of Josiah, really in many ways the hero of 2 Kings. Now what is it that makes, what's at the heart of what makes Josiah special? Think about it. Think about what happened. Think about how the text, again, this is good DBS reading, right? If you read the text carefully, you notice something. What made all the difference for Josiah? When he found the book of the law. But it wasn't the finding of the book of the law. Then what did he do? He read it. But it wasn't the reading of the book of the law. It was, he responded. It's one thing to have the book of the law. It's another thing to read it. But Josiah took it one step farther. What makes Josiah special, what makes Josiah the sort of paradigm man of God in this whole horrible, messy time, is that when he read it with a responsive heart. You know, don't you? You can read the Bible and get bored. You can read the Bible and get glassy-eyed and ignore it. You can read the Bible and get irritated. You can decide not to read the Bible. In none of those cases are you reading with a responsive heart. But you also know what it is to read it with a responsive heart, don't you? When you ask questions of the text, like what would God have me do in response to what I'm learning at this point. That's what Josiah had going for him. That softness of heart, that responsiveness to the text, that when he read it, he understood that he was reading the Word of God and it demanded something of his life. He needed to change something. It called him to repentance, his people to repentance, and ultimately to the kinds of reforms that God had been seeking all along. Unfortunately, he was succeeded by Jehoahaz, who reigned only 3 months and managed to do evil in the eyes of the Lord in that period of time. And now it goes from bad to worse. Jehoiakim now comes to the fore. He is Pharaoh Necho's puppet. Remember, Josiah had been defeated by the Egyptian king, so the Egyptian king now installs Jehoiakim. He pays tribute to Egypt. Habakkuk has his ministry during this time. Pharaoh Necho goes up and fights with Nebuchadnezzar and loses. That's the Battle of Carchemish that we talked about earlier, which establishes Nebuchadnezzar now as the leader of the region. Because Jehoiakim turned against Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar turned against Judea. And now we are seeing the beginning of the end. Jehoiakim was replaced by Jehoiachin. So when you see that CH, it's not, you don't, that ch sound that we do in English, that doesn't happen in Hebrew. When you see a CH, it's a ch. You say? And by the way, there's no such thing as a J. There's actually, it's kind of a Y. So you would say Jehoiachin. Jehoiachin. So Jehoiachin is king in 598, just at the time when Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacks. He lays siege to Jerusalem in 598 and 7. And then he takes Jerusalem basically, and what he does is, taking a page out of the Assyrian book, he deports the Hebrews, but he only deports some of them. He takes 10,000 elites among the Hebrews and he deports them, including Jehoiakim himself. He also looted the temple treasures and went back home. He then set up a puppet king to rule in his stead. That was Zedekiah. He is the uncle of Jehoiachin. During this period of time, we continue to have the ministry of Jeremiah. We also have Daniel. We also have Ezekiel getting into the act. Eventually, Zedekiah rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar attacks again. Now lays siege to Jerusalem again. An 18-month-long siege now. And finally, on the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, he sacks the city of Jerusalem and destroys the temple. So ends the southern kingdom of Judah in 586 or 587 BC. And so begins the Babylonian exile, where the rest of the Hebrews now are deported. But remember, they're allowed to stay together and retain their identity within Babylon. And remember that Babylon's not going to last very long. They are going to be replaced by whom? Persia. Now, remember that the books of 1st and 2nd Kings are being written from this exilic perspective, right? It's somebody writing in the exile, looking back and recounting all these things. So we're approaching the time of the author. So when we look at the big picture of Kings, what do we see? We see the good and the bad. Now remember, in the north, what do we see? All bad. In the south, you have a mixed bag. You have some who are treated as good. You have Asa, you have Jehoshaphat, Jehoash, Amaziah. Whoa, what'd I do? Sorry. Amaziah, Azariah, Jotham, Hezekiah, and Josiah being the two big ones, right? The two really good guys. But still the majority were bad. And you have the whole list there of the bad ones. Of course, Manasseh is the really bad one, and Athaliah is the question mark, because remember, there's no judgment formula. It doesn't say whether she's good or bad, but the tone is pretty bad. So I'm going with bad on that one. Remember, she's hooked up with the Ahab family, and there's a lot of bad stuff going on there. So there you have it. What you have, again, this is one of those really strange things. Generally speaking, when ancient people have chronicles that tell about their story, what they tell is all the heroic things they did. The Hebrew story is largely a story of failure. There's some bright points along the way, but it is largely a story of failure. Even their great kings, David had his major sin problems. Even Solomon did. And the whole kingdom is divided. And the northern kingdom is all bad, and the southern kingdom is mostly bad. And ultimately, even despite the bright spots of a Manasseh and, Hezekiah and a Josiah, nevertheless, the southern kingdom also turns away from God, and ultimately, God has to do something. God has to rattle the cage of the Hebrews so strongly that they will finally get it. Because after all, the whole story of the Old Testament is about a God who desperately loves his people. And he's trying everything in his bag of tricks to try to get them to respond in freedom to him.